Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Interesting comments from Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns in separate interviews. We'll dissect those on today's Minnesota Basketball Party.
This is Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Timberwolves talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota Basketball Party on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up? It's Wolves Talk every Wednesday on the Minnesota Basketball Party. It's part of Locked On Sports Minnesota, and that's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen on this Wednesday. For your second listen, check out Ben Beacon and Locked On Wolves, great daily Wolves content wherever you get your podcasts, and that's where you hear the audio of this show on the Locked On Wolves podcast feed. You'll meet our panel of experts in a second. We're going to get into Anthony Edwards' comments about the previous generation in the NBA. He's angered the old guys. We'll talk about Karl-Anthony Towns really opening up to Paul George on Podcast P on a variety of topics. And the schedule got released 6 days ago. We'll react to it for the first time on this show today on the Minnesota Basketball Party, which is presented by FanDuel. New offer at FanDuel. All customers now through September 22nd can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. All right, I've given you the topics. I've introduced myself. I'm Sam Ekstrom. Let's meet the rest of our panel with this morning's opening tip.
I'm Ron Johnson, former Gophers wide receiver, Gophers Hall of Famer, NFL wide receiver, but avid basketball player and fan. I want to talk about how I'm happy Karl-Anthony Towns opened up a vein because he gave me a little bit of Twitter vindication. I'll explain that.
Reggie Wilson, Carol 11 sports director, and Karl-Anthony Towns and the Timberwolves motivated by media criticism? Say it ain't so.
I'm Jack Borman, co-host of the Locked On Wolves postcast with my man Luke Inman. And I'm excited to get into a little prediction guessing game later in the show. There should be a lot of fun.
I'm Ben Beacon, host of the daily Wolves podcast, Locked On Wolves, and give a couple of my favorite games, maybe low-key favorite games on the schedule here upcoming this season. The Wolves are on national TV a ton this year, and there's some that beyond the Christmas Day and stuff like that kind of flew under the radar.
Yeah, 25 national TV games for the Wolves. We'll circle our favorite date on the calendar coming up a little later in the show. Let's start with Cat. Cat does an extensive interview with Paul George, Podcast P, where he talks a lot, and usually when Cat talks a lot, people get mad at something he said. He says that he's like the revolutionary, like the greatest shooting big man of all time. He changed the game, or he'll say something that's just a little tone deaf. I think he came out of this and survived, and he said interesting things. He, illuminated some things from last season about injury, about his relationship with Anthony Edwards, about his source of motivation from last year's team. So a lot to chew on in this session with Paul George, but Ron Johnson gets to react first to the Cat interview. What do you got?
Well, I tweeted about J.J. McCarthy's meniscus, and I gave a varied of options that he could have, and everybody, a couple trolls, probably 3 or 4 trolls after it came out that he had a full meniscus repair and he's out for the season. Everybody's like, oh, this tweet aged like milk and da-da-da. Shut up. Because why? Karl-Anthony Towns had the same procedure, but he went with the route to come back faster. And what did he say? I came back a month later. So you take that, you trolls. You can come back in 4 weeks. I've done it. Karl-Anthony Towns has done it. But Karl-Anthony Towns pointed out some good stuff that I think J.J. McCarthy probably in the Minnesota Vikings world and the Minnesota fans. One, the meniscus is going to be the bane of our existence. I feel like it's going to be in our minds for the rest of the next couple years. Karl-Anthony Towns is dealing with what I dealt with, which is early onset arthritis, swelling for no reason, not being able to walk and play, feeling like you can't move your knee and not being able to get out of bed. So I think that's the reason why J.J. McCarthy went with the full repair. So I understand that, but the fact that Karl-Anthony Towns did it, now he has a full off season. I hope they go back in there and make sure to check it out, get whatever floating bodies are left, if there's any additional scarring, to maybe give him a couple more sutures to help him out, get off of his feet. Hopefully he did that. We're not sure. But Karl-Anthony Towns, I think that gave us more of like, man, like he has a little bit of dog in him. Like a lot of people question his toughness, could he do this? We know Jimmy Butler questioned his toughness, and he showed he's tough enough to play through an injury like that for his team. And so now maybe that gives them like, man, this dude's willing to go out there on one leg for us. This is our year. So hopefully that adds a little bit of salt into their offseason to be really salty about like, we got to come back and get to the NBA Finals.
Reggie, you teased that Cat was motivated by media criticism. I mean, those Carol 11 newscasts were really diabolical. You just savage criticism of Karl-Anthony Towns and the Wolves.
Jack, I'm pretty sure you were in the locker room too, but do you remember early on in the season, Karl-Anthony Towns was like in a mood for like the first, month or so of the season. And he was very like monotone, very like, it is what it is type energy, like didn't really give a whole lot, wasn't really engaging with much of the media, which was really interesting. And I was like wondering like, what is his deal? And I think that's probably a part of it. Like, I think he heard people chirping, he heard people talking, and he didn't really have anything for the media much. He was just like, nah, like keep that same energy. And it's so interesting that he brought that up on the pod, that they actually paid attention. But I mean, honestly, there were so many people talking, especially after that first year, them trying the Twin Towers experiment. Is it going to work? And I know they had confidence within the organization, within the team. I mean, they had to, like, it had to work. That was a really big gamble that Tim Connolly made, hoping that it would pay off for them, and it did. And they did make a run. It's just so interesting to hear like a lot of the athletes say what gives them motivation and what they draw on to be successful, and to think that like media criticism is something that gets them extra motivated to go out there and shine. It's kind of interesting to me. I think it should be organic. It should be, inner, but I think a lot of times, and Ron could probably speak on this a little bit more, but I've known several athletes to tell me like any and everything that they can grab onto to give them a little bit of an edge, even Tom Brady, year 20 of his career, he's still thinking about, oh yeah, there were all these teams that passed on me several times. And it's just like, dude, you've won like 5-6 Super Bowls. Like, I don't think you need to carry that chip anymore, but it's just like, you have to do a little bit of something to just continue to give you that edge. And, I talked to my wife, who was a junior Olympic volleyball player and played volleyball for years. And she was just like, yeah, anything and everything that could give me something. Like, they said I can't do this, they said I can't do that, like that motivates. And I'm like, who is they? She was like, whoever it is, whoever that may have said anything. And so I think that's very interesting that that was something that Karl admitted was something that motivated them to push to go as far as they did. How much that really played a factor in that, who knows? But I did think that was a very interesting comment from him. Also, too, just kind of want to call something back. Game 5 of the Western Conference semifinals against the Nuggets, Cat was kind of undercut by KCP and went down. And the knee, he was grabbing right away. And I remember after the game going up to Karl and asking him, hey, you took a little bit of a spill there in the game. Like, are you good? Are you okay? And, just straight face, I'm good. Yeah, I took a bit of a, bump knees or something he said. And he was just like, I'm good. And I just wondered how much like the knee was actually bothering him. But I think because he knows all the criticism that he gets in the media with, basketball fans, I don't think that was something that he was trying to call attention to. I remember just him saying like he puts up all those shots, 1,000 shots or whatever he said when he was in that slump, and everybody was letting him have it. He couldn't really say anything about anything without getting criticism. And so I think that was probably something that he probably wanted to just keep close to the vest to make sure that he was not getting that sort of criticism. And to Ron's point, yeah, I think it did kind of show that he had that dog in him, because Joel Embiid decided to get the full repair and missed a lot of time with that meniscus injury. And Cat decided to come back early, and I don't know what that's going to mean for his, long-term future. I remember Michael Jordan, towards the latter stages of his career, was getting his knee drained like every other day because he had fluid on the knees, and they were bothering him. Didn't know if he was going to play day to day, especially when he was with the Wizards. And so I don't know what that's going to do for Karl's game moving forward and his overall health of the knee moving forward. But that is pretty admirable that he decided. It was admirable in the first place that he decided to do the trim instead of the full repair, so he can come back and be there for the team. But I think, respect to him for playing through what seems like it was more serious than he was even letting on.
Jack Borman, what do you got? Cat with Podcast P.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Reggie was saying, no question about it. Like, I think that the tough thing for Karl is that when things are going well, he doesn't get the shine that he should get. But when things are not going great, he probably gets, more criticism than he's earned, which I think is an unfortunate place to be. And I think that's where you saw a lot of that, really subdued. I'm not really going to say much at the start of the season. Like, I remember being there for media day and being like, whoa, this is like a totally different Cat. And I think he kind of realized that people saw right through that and was like, this isn't who you've been your whole career. Like, just be who you are. And I think he came out of that. And yeah, but I think with Karl too, like, I think he gives different answers sometimes too when the cameras are on versus when they're not on. Like, I've gone up to Karl several times and gotten, different answers from him, or I shouldn't say, different answers, just more honest answers from him that maybe have a little bit more detail that obviously is off the record you're not going to talk about. But yeah, I think the most interesting thing from his appearance with Paul George was, I just think that, he really admitted that the Timberwolves are motivated by, everybody saying any and everything about Rudy Gobert. And I think, it was no secret that Rudy didn't necessarily get along with, all of his teammates in Utah, and that probably had a negative stigma attached to him when he arrived in Minnesota, especially coming off everything with COVID. But I think for the team to band together around Rudy and fully appreciate every single thing that he brings to the team, from, just being in the right place defensively, doing all the little things, being an excellent screener, fighting on the offensive glass, all that stuff, the way that they appreciate him. I know that Rudy Gobert really appreciates that. And I know that Rudy Gobert has appreciated the way the fans have kind of realized that the players appreciate that. And have given him his flowers. And I thought it was really cool when that kind of culminated in Game 4 down in Dallas. We were all in the locker room down there in Dallas, and we all saw, like, wait, Ant's here, Karl's here, Rudy's here. No one went up to the inside desk, did they? And we were kind of figuring this out in real time. And so, we asked some of the players, and we were like, hell no, we're not going to speak to the inside the NBA desk after the way that Draymond Green and Charles Barkley, have talked about Rudy Gobert. And we all know what Shaq has said about Rudy Gobert as well. So I think, for the Timberwolves to kind of have that show of strength all the way to the very end of the season, I think was really cool, and is something that, is fun to hear that was something that motivated them, and that they care so much about, having each other's backs, especially when, it may not be the most popular thing to do, around the NBA. But I think locally, that's something that the fan base really appreciates. This team, it was really easy to tell that these guys all loved one another and would do anything for each other. And for Karl, especially, I talked to Karl several times when Rudy first got here, and you would see the cameras are off and people are starting to file out of the locker room. And what's Karl-Anthony Towns doing? He's walking over to Rudy Gobert and saying, hey man, anytime you want to come over to my house and hang out and watch UFC or play video games or do anything, like, he's like, my door's always open. You just send me a text and come over. And like, to see those two, really bond early on, and to see how much Karl has stuck up for Rudy, I think is something that is really admirable on a teammate level. And it was fun to see that kind of trickle down the roster this past season.
Yeah. And the other teammate item from this podcast appearance too, just talking up how good the relationship is with Anthony Edwards, and how the media trying to tear them apart or plant the seeds that they're not going to get along couldn't be farther from the truth. I thought that was really cool too from that interview. Ben Beacon, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, the injury, I won't rehash too much of what everybody else said, but I agree with what Ron was saying about it. I think I mean, you have to. There's so many different options for a meniscus, and Ron did a great job of explaining, especially from personal experience. And for Cat to chose to do what he did, which is obviously a different situation than JJ McCarthy, given the point in Cat's career, the point in the season, etc. I don't know that, like, I mean, I've heard that, like, there's pain cleanup procedures, etc. after if you get the procedure that Cat had done, but there was never really any reporting on it at the time. And I'm sure that Cat was keeping that and the team was keeping it close to the vest for competitive reasons, in the playoffs. But Cat it's funny because in so often in the more formal media interviews or when I remember back when Cat was drafted and people were like, oh, the front offices and those anonymous GM surveys, everyone's like, he's just a dream, because to the media, he knows, he sounds polished, like he kind of he sugarcoats things, but like in a way that seemed that people thought was media friendly. But we also know that Cat in situations like this gets away from, because and that's some of the flack he gets sometimes is because it off is really corny. But in situations like this, where it's a casual conversation, a podcast is the reason why people love podcasts so much, right? Especially with athletes. He's so much more candid, and it doesn't feel like he's just saying, yeah, I played through some tough stuff. He's like actually saying, here's what the deal was. Like, and it's 100% believable. Nobody's going to think he's making any of this stuff up, because this is Cat unvarnished, Cat talking candidly to one of his friends who's also a player. And to know that he was struggling to walk and struggling to get out of bed, and how swollen his knee was, and playing through it. And he played really well, other than the shooting as the playoffs went on. Other than the 3-point shooting, he generally played well in the playoffs. And that was one of the things that I thought was a little unfair, some of the past playoff criticism of his performances in the playoffs. And I think, given all that context, and also, by the way, this was never mentioned. I shouldn't say never, but very rarely mentioned on the national level on TNT or on ESPN. Nobody talked about Cat's injury, and people didn't realize this dude just came back in 5 weeks or less from a serious procedure that most people said 6 to 8 weeks, and could have knocked him out until the next season. And nobody was giving him the credit of, and to his credit, he didn't come out and say that at the time. And I think that got really lost in Cat's performance and what that meant to the Wolves in the playoffs. And so to have that additional context straight from Cat's own mouth, from his own words, I think kind of brings all that back up in my mind. Like, man, nobody really considered that. And we talk about how the team as a whole was relatively healthy during the season until Cat's injury. For him to be playing through that, their second best player, all around player in the playoffs, to be playing through what he played through and playing as well as he did for as long as he did into June, that's really significant. And I think that podcast appearance really, did a good job of shining a light on that.
Still plenty to get to, including schedule release reaction, Anthony Edwards comments, and a preseason awards guessing game that I've conjured up. That's next on the Minnesota Basketball Party. Today's episode brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back, Minnesota Basketball Party, part of a great lineup here at Locked On Sports Minnesota, the Ron Johnson Show on Tuesdays. He had former Vikings first-round pick Dwayne Clemens on yesterday. What an interview. If you like the Vikings, that was so good. Minnesota Football Party, Mondays and Thursdays, and our roundtable on Fridays. Let's go back to Thursday. The schedule was released for the Minnesota Timberwolves. We got all 82 games. We got dates and times, 25 national games. And I know Ben Beacon had a couple takeaways from that. Ben, what are you circling on the schedule for the Wolves?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many so many good games on there. Obviously the opener at the Lakers on TNT, part of NBA opening night, the game following the ring ceremony night in Boston. And I think the first one I actually did last week after the schedule was out on Locked On Wolves. I highlighted 5 from the first half of the season that I was really excited for. The first one is that Friday night, November 1st, home against Denver at late 8:30 p.m. ESPN tip. Crowd's going to be crazy. It's, last game of a 3-game homestand. There's a real chance they're 4-0 at that point, or maybe 3-1. They have Dallas earlier that week. That's going to be a ton of fun. I also have one that I think is a little under the radar is if you go to early December, they play Golden State 3 times out of, well, actually it's not really 3 out of 4 because in-season tournaments in there, but they play them in back-to-back games in Golden State like they did last year. So remember the Rudy Draymond thing last year, of course, that was part of 2 games in Golden State. Weirdly, they have 2 straight games in Golden State again this year, but they have a Friday night, 9 p.m. Central ESPN game, the first of the 2 games in Golden State, and that's coming off a tough stretch where they have, it's like Kings, Clippers, Lakers, Clippers, Golden State, at Golden State. And there's also the Steve Kerr coaching the Olympics and the Steph and teammate dynamic too. So that'll be part of the national media lead up the first time, that discussion will come back up in the media on ESPN. So I think there's going to be a lot kind of around that game. And then also the Rudy Draymond stuff, no doubt will be talked about. Of course, there's Christmas Day. I don't want to steal anybody else's thunder on some of these other ones, but one last one that I think is a bit under the radar as well is the first time they play Oklahoma City isn't until New Year's Eve. And it is a New Year's Eve game at Oklahoma City. It's an NBA TV game, but that's the first matchup against OKC that they have all season. And of course, many people are picking OKC to win the conference. I'm sure, I know Jack has thoughts on that, but that'll be the first time we get to see these 2 teams play each other, on New Year's Eve. So that'll be a ton of fun as well.
Yeah. And speaking of OKC, I said this at the time, but they've got a 3 out of 4 stretch against OKC in February on either side of the All-Star break. So going into the break, OKC, coming out of the break, 2 of their first 3 are against OKC, including a back-to-back on back-to-back nights in different cities, which is kind of a weird scheduling quirk, but that'll be a key stretch to decide the West. Ron Johnson, biggest schedule takeaway.
I wasn't gonna steal it because I know Reggie might want this one, but I gotta go with the Lakers. Like the Lakers game, that's the first game. If you think about what's gonna happen, it's probably gonna be the Bronny game. If there's any time for LeBron to get Bronny out there, it's probably game 1. And then Bronny gets sit back down to wherever if he's a 2-way. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And then also the other side of it, because then the media side, if Bronny doesn't play, it's going to erupt because everybody's going to be wondering. So that was one of them for me. Honestly, when you look at the schedule, I'm looking at all the matchups, not so much of when they're happening, who they're playing, why they're playing them. Also the preseason too. I mean, their preseason game is going to be against the Lakers as well, which is kind of weird. They're starting the season with that, ending the season, or starting the preseason with that, and then starting the regular season with that with the Lakers. So we should be able to get a chance to see Bronny, I'm guessing, in the preseason, and then we'll see if he makes it the regular season and everything. But I mean, honestly, the matchup for me is just seeing where they are: Kings, Nuggets, Mavericks early in the season. That's going to show us what this team is about. If they go out there and lay an egg, because the Raptors, I mean, I kind of joked about the Raptors last year and they lost to them, but then they turned it around. But if they go out early and Lakers, Kings, Nuggets, Mavs, and Raptors, and they're not, I'd say at least 3-2 out of those 5, you got some explaining to do, Lucy, because it's not going to be good. If they go 1-4, where the Kings knock them off, the Nuggets knock them off, the Mavs knock them off, and the Lakers, and they start 1-4, and let's not say the Raptors beat them, they start 1-5. Oh my God. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be the Paris hangover. And people are going to be wondering, what is this? Is Anthony Edwards just trying to get out of here? But yeah, that's I'm looking for the early ones. I want to set the tone always, just like the Vikings. Like as much as everybody wants the 49ers to come to Minnesota, I'm looking for Daniel Jones. Like I want to see that first game. So for me, it's those early games.
Reggie.
Yeah, I like I mean, I do want to see them play the Lakers, Ron. Yes, obviously. But I love the Mavericks Nuggets back to back. The first week of the season, second week of the season, like that is going to be an early test for the Wolves, and I'm interested to see that. I want to see them in San Antonio against Wemby early on, but I'm also looking forward to that first matchup against the Suns. You know, that I feel like the Suns probably feel disrespected after, getting just swept on out of there by
They
the.
should feel disrespected.
I mean, yeah, and all the smack that Anna's talked to KD since then, and him just saying like, yeah, man, it hurt me, to get them out of there like that. It was really hurtful to me, but we had to do what we had to do. Um, but but also,
It's every evil arc movie. You got to kill your hero at some point. It just
exactly,
happens.
exactly. But other than the Christmas game, which I'm really looking forward to as well, but their first matchup against the Celtics, November 24th, like that should be pretty good. I think, and this is just petty wars to me, but Ant got more PT than Jason Tatum did in the USA basketball games. I'm sure Jason Tatum like, look, did I not just win this ring? Like, y'all have to see me. Y'all have to come through me, through this house, if you want to do it. They had some really good battles last year as well. But also, I'm really looking forward to when they play the Grizzlies. Doesn't look like they play the Grizzlies until that next calendar year, but looks like January 11th. But I'm looking forward to I feel like because Ja's kind of semi-demise the last couple years, he had the, bang bang shoot 'em up deal, and then the whole injury as well. That was just kind of a freak thing. I feel like the league has kind of moved on, and I think a lot of people have talked about like Ant kind of taking the mantle from kind of like Ja's like arc into being the new it guy in the league. And so and part of it is Ja's own fault, and I'm sure he recognizes that. But I think he's going to be coming back with a little bit of a vengeance this year and have the Grizzlies competitive. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the rivalry between the Wolves and the Grizzlies renewed a little bit as well. So very intriguing stuff early in the season and throughout the season. I'm looking forward to seeing how the Wolves kind of handle that, and then how they bring their young guys along as well into the rotation to be contributors.
When you're good like the Wolves, every matchup just has a little more meaning to it, doesn't it? It's fun to look at all the angles. Jack, put a bow on this one.
That's where I was going. I was going MLK Day in Memphis. It's a cool game, 1:30 afternoon, tip time there. But Reg pretty much nailed everything that I was going to mention there. But yeah, I think too the other thing for me is there's two stretches, honestly, too. Beyond that, the opening stretch right there, like LA, Sacramento, Toronto, Dallas, Denver, San Antonio, Charlotte, Chicago, Portland. So those are the first, 9 games of the season, and those are all teams that are not very good defenses. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how Rob Dillingham kind of acclimates to playing with the Wolves after, having a whole preseason and training camp to kind of, get his shots off and kind of understand where to get his in the flow of the offense, and then kind of having a soft schedule, at least in terms of facing opposing defenses. I think will be fun to watch his development over the first, 3 weeks of the 2-3 weeks of the season or so. And then if you fast forward right to the end from kind of pretty much the last month of the season, the Timberwolves have in there their longest homestand of the season, which is a 5-game homestand. And then they have 3 very winnable games in my estimation, against Indiana, Phoenix, and Detroit. So that little 3-game bridge. And then they go into the longest road stand of the season. So I like that they get to play Denver right away, get that out of the way. And then they end it in Memphis. And then they've got 2 games after that to close out the regular season against 2 teams that will unquestionably be tanking, in the Nets and in the Jazz. So I think it'll be kind of fun to see how they're able to hopefully build some momentum in that 5-game homestand, and then have that 5-game road stand and 2 games to close. I think it should be a pretty a good mix of some favorable matchups mixed in with some really competitive hoops leading into the playoffs. And if it's anything like the last couple of seasons, that last week of the season has been really important for the Timberwolves in terms of where their seed could end up being. So And especially when you consider that, a team like Oklahoma City and Dallas too probably are going to be teams that are right up there fighting for that 1, 2, 3, and throw Denver in there for that 4 spot as well. So should be a lot of fun come end of March and into April.
And one nugget from the analytics database, positive residual, the Timberwolves will travel the most miles of any team in the NBA, 49,900 miles traveled. That's a lot. That happens when you're right in the middle of the country. You got to go to both coasts, and the Wolves will definitely get some frequent flyer miles this season. Let's pivot to Ant. Ant did the thing that gets people riled up like no other. He dissed the previous generation. Here are the quotes, and this is hilarious because he's asked about the older generation, how it's different from today's basketball players. He goes, "I didn't watch it back in the day, so I can't speak on it," Edwards said to the Wall Street Journal. Edwards then continued to speak on it. "They say it was tougher back then than it is now, but I don't think anybody had skill back then. Michael Jordan was the only one that really had skill. You know what I mean? That's why when they saw Kobe, they were like, oh my God, but now everybody has skill," unquote. So he gave MJ his flowers, and he left everybody else out. Jack, we'll start with Jack here. Should Anthony Edwards not have spoken on it? Should he have just left that one alone?
To be honest with you, I don't really care. Like, I think you could be totally fine with Ant saying whatever he wants because it's his personality. Like, if anything, I almost see it as a pro in the Ant box because Ant's going to be himself no matter what. I've been in the Timberwolves locker room a million times. I've seen the way he acts when the cameras are rolling, when the cameras are not rolling. He is exactly the same person 110% of the time. And this is just further evidence of that. Like, I think it's pretty unquestionable that the league now is way, way, way deeper than it's ever been. And across the board, it's more skilled than it was, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. But the guys at the top of the league have always been incredibly skilled. And obviously he's off base with that, but I mean, it's just Ant being Ant. I don't think it's really anything super serious. I don't think he was like, really trying to take up a crusade against all these old heads and just, ruin their day. I think it was just like Ant just being Ant. And, I think that's just kind of what you chalk it up to.
Isaiah Thomas responded, said, "Propaganda works, so be careful what you choose to believe."
Which Isaiah Thomas, though?
The old Isaiah, the one who would be offended by this.
Okay.
The old Isaiah Thomas.
Zeke.
No surprise he would be offended though by this. He seems to take issue with a lot of stuff. Ben.
Yeah, I agree completely. I was going to say, I mean, you read the whole quote, Sam, but I thought it was hilarious that he said, "I can't speak on it," and then he spoke on it. Like it's just perfect. And it's exactly what you'd expect, all like through and through. And I don't know. Like, it also depends on, I mean, this is impossible it's one of those impossible arguments, right? Like, it depends on how you define skill. Clearly, yeah, like, yes, obviously there's a lot more good shooters now, but that's because they didn't shoot threes as much back then. And it wasn't a skill that, we know there were 2-3 years where MJ really developed a 3-point shot because it became more of a thing and he wanted to have it. And he was like nearly 40% from three for a couple of years. Like, I mean, it's not to say those guys could not have developed a 3-point shot, or if you wanted to find skill as, one-on-one skill. I mean, there was a period in the 90s where that was a pretty, that was a big part of offense, right? At least in the late 90s was isolation basketball. And there were a lot of guys that had skill. Now that's not going as far back as Isaiah Thomas and MJ. Well, I guess MJ a little bit, but I don't know. It's just it's an impossible thing to argue in either direction. Skill is such a nebulous word because, like, I mean, what are we talking about? Like, there were some of those dunk contests were pretty crazy, but they weren't Vince Carter. They weren't Zach LaVine. They weren't what we've seen in recent years, but it also, like, it was a new thing, right? The first dunk contests were the first dunk contests. Like, guys didn't work on, whatever, trying to do crazy dunks because they didn't need to, or whatever. The dunk contest didn't exist back in the 70s. Right. So, there's so many different ways you could take this. It is just Ant and undoubtedly it's going to come up, NBA, TNT, it's going to come up. Somebody's going to make the comment early in the season and it'll be talked about. But I guess I'm glad that it happened now and not in October, because then hopefully it dies down a little bit. We don't have to deal with it. But I think that's part of it is it's baked in with Ant, and people can kind of, everybody except Isaiah Thomas, I think, can kind of shrug it off and be like, Ant's just being Ant. He doesn't really believe or know what he's saying all the time. He just says stuff and everybody just rolls with it.
Other players that he's angered, as I'm digging into it, Glenn Rice, Ron Harper, and Jamal Crawford, who kind of bridged a couple different generations. Ron Johnson, your thoughts on this?
So it's just Ant. I agree with everybody. It's Ant being Ant. But at the end of the day, I think there are some things you need to be a little bit careful with. I will say I watched and I don't know what age they were when they did this. I watched the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar versus Dr. J 1-on-1, and it was gross. I was highly disappointed by their one-on-one skills. When you look at now a Wemby, a skilled 7-footer plus, what he can do with a basketball compared to what Kareem could do. I understand what Anthony Edwards is saying because he's talking about the true like Kyrie Irving ball handling skills. Now, was it just Mike? No, because that's why Isaiah Thomas got mad. Like Isaiah Thomas was one of the best ball. I grew up in Detroit, so I watched all the stuff he did. He's one of the best ball handlers, dribbling with one finger, dribbling with two fingers, dribbling, between his legs with one finger on each arm, on each hand. I mean, the guy was very skilled with the ball. You had John Stockton who could handle the ball. You had Bob Cousy. If you go back and watch his old highlights, he could handle the rock. But overall, and that's where Anthony Edwards probably is going to have to break into this later. When you watch the NBA game back when Michael Jordan played, he was head and shoulders, him, Bird, and that's why they are the greatest we talk about, because the rest of those guys, I mean, if you throw out a name from one of those Celtics or Bulls teams, you're like, I don't know about that. Like Bill Cartwright, I wouldn't call him skilled. He was just big and tall. You look at Oakley, I wouldn't have called him skilled. He was just a bully. That's where I think the big difference is now you're seeing guys like Julius Randle, that you put him back in that era as a big with his skill, his ability to shoot. You look at some of these other bigs like Karl-Anthony Towns that can shoot and can dribble a little bit, but he might run you over. Like that's where I think Anthony Edwards is looking to see like, oh man, these guys are different skills. But again, new technology, new training. I mean, you got apps now to teach people how to dribble at the age of 5. So it's just different. It's just a different era. They're getting a different level. But I would say their top and today's top, it would be a battle. And the biggest difference in a guy like Kobe, I would probably put him with the old era. They're going to bully the crap out of a young era. They played a different type of ball. Like, I mean, I just watched I don't know if you guys remember that, the Jeremy Lin, him and Kobe got into it. He called him Charmin and, told Mitch, like, hey man, I'm here to get better. This ain't helping me practicing with these guys. Like, it was different back then.
Reggie.
So yeah, I just to punch it home one last time, to your point, Ben, to your point, Sam. I wasn't there, so I can't speak on it too much. And then goes on to speak on it and say some things that really was inflammatory towards some of the people like Zeke and all those guys who took exception to it. So I agree too with Ben. Like, the idea of skill is just different, just because like what it means now and what it meant back then are just two different things. But like, you watch the league back then and there were guys like Clyde and Neek and Zeke and like all these guys who were very highly skilled. And I remember but I remember listening to Kenny Smith saying like the game was how it was back then. But like to say like, I think the idea was Kyrie's handles. And Kenny was like, man, I saw some dudes that I play with that were right up there with Kyrie with the handles. And like, but that just wasn't what was seen. That wasn't a part of what the game was back then. And I think his overall point was just like, yeah, we see the game at the level that it is now, but like, had we had the players back then with the game now, like they would have adapted to the game and been just as good as these players now. I do think that we just see some absolutely incredible shot making. And it's so interesting, going back to Paul George, like he's so many of these young kids like GOATs, and he hasn't won anything meaningful in his playing career. But Paul George is one of the premier shot makers in the league. There was a video of Paul George going against the guy from TNT that breaks all the news, like, and all of a sudden, like, the dude's just all up in his grill, and I know we saw all the Carmelo Anthony videos where the guy just has a hand in his face like this, and he's just pulling and just making shots. Like, the shot making in the league right now is insane. But, like, I think it's a little disrespectful to some of the guys who played back then to say that the skill is better now than it was back then. And I do think it's a little bit disrespectful to Mike, honestly, and where he was as a player, to say that the game wasn't, it was like Mike and the Pips or whatever. Like, it really wasn't like it was really hard for Mike to win these rings as well. It kind of diminishes his kind of lore as well to diminish, the talent in the league around Michael Jordan back then as well. So I'm not like mad at it, because it's a recency bias type of a conversation, and Ant didn't have the information of being around during that time and watching the game as he gets a chance to do it now with some of the skill guys that he gets a chance to do it with. Like, I saw Damian Lillard tweeting about Steph Curry's magic in the Olympics, and Damian Lillard is a unreal shot maker as well. And so it's just a different game right now.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that, like, some people like to tell the older guys, hey, pipe down, let the kids have their fun, like, be quiet. But in 2050, when people try to tell me that they weren't skilled back in the day with Anthony Edwards and LeBron and Lillard, and that if someone tries to tell me that this generation wasn't skilled 25 years from now, then I'm going to be the one who's mad, right? Because I'm watching him with my own eyes, and I feel like I have a strong opinion about it too. So we'll see how this plays out in the future. Like, Anthony Edwards could someday find himself on the other end of this.
And Sam, you've got HD video, no, we got none of that Kareem, hey, where's the footage? What out? Or, we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, no, I know that. NBA.com will have all the clips at our fingertips. Probably like in our eye, like there'll be some chip that like it's in our eyes. We can just like think of the highlight we want, and it'll pop up like right in front of us. It'll just project in the air. Speaking of Edwards, we're going to guess where he landed in ESPN's preseason awards predictions. That's next on the Minnesota Basketball Party. We're brought to you today by FanDuel. We've been talking a lot about FanDuel over the summer, and now that the sports are starting up again, NFL, college football, NBA soon after that, FanDuel is the place to be. It's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason. All the lines, all the leagues. But now they've got a great promotion for you as well. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Bet $5, get 3 free weeks of your teams out of market. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Download America's #1 sportsbook and check out the lines coming up. Vikings preseason football, they're plus 1.5 at Philadelphia on Saturday. Check out that and lots more at FanDuel. Make every moment more. We close today with a little guessing game. ESPN put together a panel of experts, analysts, and voters, and they predicted who are going to win the major awards in the NBA this season. So we start with MVP, and we start with Reggie Wilson here. Where did they have Anthony Edwards? First, most likely, second, third, fourth. There's a top 10 list for all of these. Where did Ant land?
Dang. Fifth?
Okay. And by the way, Ben cheated and looked. He was honest about it, though. So Ben's excluded from the guessing game. But make sure to check out his reaction. Yeah, check out Locked On Wolves, where he talks about this at length. Jack Borman.
What was the question, Sam?
Where do they have, or like where is Edwards ranked in their most likely to win MVP?
Oh, I'd say like 7th or 8th.
Okay. Ron?
Yeah, I was going with 7.
Okay. Reggie gets a point. He's closest. They have Edwards 4th behind Luka, Jokic, and Shea. And he's ahead of Giannis and Embiid.
As he should be.
Everybody in the West.
Point for Reggie. Who will win NBA Rookie of the Year? Where do they have Rob Dillingham? Let's start with Jack this time.
I'm going to go 4th.
Ron?
Rob Dillingham. You got those French guys. I'm going to go 3rd.
All right. And Reggie?
Stay with 5.
Yeah, 2 points for Reggie now. Reggie nailed it. It's Reed Shepherd, Zach Edey, Donovan Clingan, Stephon Castle, and then Rob Dillingham, 5th most likely to win the Rookie of the Year. Reggie is dominating the game.
Locked in, baby.
This might be kind of an easier one. Defensive Player of the Year. Where does Rudy land? Ron?
1.
1. Got Rudy 1. Okay. Reggie?
I'll go 2nd.
Jack?
I'll go 2nd as well.
And you would both be correct. Victor Wembanyama gets the first place nod. Ooh, Ron. Tough one. Tough beat.
We know who's going to win it. Rudy's going to win it.
Pretty juicy odds on FanDuel. Bam Adebayo, 3rd. Anthony Davis, 4th. Mikal Bridges, 5th. All right. So Reggie's got 3. Jack's got 1. Ron, you're trying to get on the board. 6th Man of the Year. Naz Reid won it last year. Where do they have him this year? Reggie?
2.
Jack?
2.
Ron?
1.
Yeah, so I give again, Reggie and Jack split the points. He's 3.
Oh, my goodness.
He's 3. They've got Alex Caruso jumping over him, and Malik Monk as well. Caruso going to the Thunder. That's a bold prediction for Caruso.
I love that they have a starter in the 6th Man of the Year conversation there. That's great.
Because Caruso's taking Giddey's spot, right?
Yeah, and you should
I
start
thought Giddey was off the bench, though.
Giddey's taking Diddy's spot.
Oh, man. Here we go.
Moving on. The last one. Coach of the Year.
I'm talking about the white party. He's going to Rick Rubin's white party or Michael Rubin. Diddy's no longer invited.
Start with Jack. Coach of the Year, Chris Finch. Where is he in the top 10?
Put some respect on my guy's name. King of North Loop, number 1.
Ron?
I'm going to go 2.
Okay. Reggie?
3.
I mean, Ben, you've seen this, right? This is by far
crazy.
this is the biggest snub you can possibly have.
7. He's 7.
He's not
keep
on
like
the list.
As I was talking about it on the podcast, the more I talked about it, I was like, this is crazy. Like, he's not even in the top 10.
Oh, wow.
And he's not.
We flew too close to the sun last year with that Western Conference Finals appearance. Can't get much better.
Well, but
the knee
that was my
injury-
first. Sorry, I was going to say.
Yeah,
He's a
go ahead.
comeback coach of the year after his knee injury.
So I was going to say that was my first reaction too. Like, okay, well, they got close. Like, but Joe Mazzulla, I think, is 2nd, right, Sam? And Dagno is like top 3 too.
Whereas Mazzulla's 3, Dagno's 2, Tibbs is 1, Popovich is 4th.
To have 2 of the final 3 coaches coaching in the top 3 of the voting and Finch is in the others receiving votes category is insane. Like, what happens if they win 62 games and win the West? He's obviously going to win Coach of the Year. I have no idea what those odds are at FanDuel, but if they're anything close to this, like, it's crazy.
Yeah, let me just check the FanDuel and then we'll get out of here because it's like they forgot that Chris Finch existed, which is absurd that I mean, and I think they're looking at teams that could conceivably improve a lot, like the Rockets, the Grizzlies, the Magic, the
And people think the
Spurs.
Thunder won the offseason, but like they also were the number 1 seed in the West already. So like I don't understand why Dagno would get so many votes and Finch wouldn't get any. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, Finch isn't that highly regarded on FanDuel either. He's 6th behind Udoka, Tibbs, Jenkins, Nurse, and Dagno. So
Got to make them believe, baby.
man, no love. Did Mike Nori steal his thunder? I don't know. Good stuff on today's Minnesota basketball party. We'll be back next week. That's Ron Johnson, Reggie Wilson, Jack Borman, Ben Beacon. I'm Sam Ekstrom. Thanks so much for watching and listening on the Locked On Wolves podcast feed for audio. Thank you, everydayers who watch Locked On Sports Minnesota all the time. Please subscribe. Tomorrow, the Minnesota football party will be live as well, and Ron Johnson will make his Thursday appearance. We'll talk to you next week here on the Minnesota basketball party.
Probably from the State Fair. So it should be a fun one down there. You never know who's going to walk behind me at the State Fair.
A bucket of cookies and a corn dog in Ron's hands tomorrow.
And PJ Fleck.
All of the above. See you tomorrow, everybody.